news and entertainment looks nothing like it did 10 years ago. In the last 2 weeks, most of you were probably reading more of your Facebook than watching the news on TV, I would bet. And that's because media is changing drastically. So we invited some of the top media people we know in new media and traditional media to hash it out and to talk a little bit about the state of media today. So you already met Mark Johnson from ZITE, part of CNN. We'll invite him back to the stage. We have Ben Rooney, the technology editor for Europe for the Wall Street Journal, a real journalist in a suit with a tie. We have Robin Wauters. He is the founding editor of Tech.eu. He used to be the European editor for the Next Web. And we have Oleksandr Tkachenko, CEO of 1+1 Media, one of the biggest media companies in Ukraine. And then finally, we have Mike Butcher, editor-at-large at TechCrunch, the infamous London bad boy. He will lead this discussion, and I think Oleksandr is going to join us. Oh, he's here. Great. So come on to the stage. This is a great panel. Enjoy. These people are rarely in the same room together, so please enjoy.
Oh, wow. Thanks very much. Have a seat over there. Okay, so we're going to eat traditional media. Ready to eat traditional media? I already had lunch, actually. Mike Butcher. Oh, gosh, that's bright. There's some people over there. Mike Butcher for TechCrunch. And we have over here Robin Wauters. Then we have Ben Rooney from the Wall Street Journal. And we have Oleksandr from 1+1 Media. Many of you know that big Ukrainian media company. And then we have Mr. Mark Johnson, who's the CEO of ZITE and CNN. And we're going to be talking about perhaps we'll talk about the user experience, the consumption of media, I think, which is extremely important right now.
Absolutely.
But kicking off, I just want to congratulate this man on launching a new blog. How about that? Fantastic.
More.
Tech.eu, and really kicking off some brilliant articles just recently, actually unpacking some long-form stuff. I mean, I think everybody's pretty aware that TechCrunch is very news-focused. We're very news-focused, as is outfits like the Wall Street Journal. So it's great to have a new player on the scene, unpacking some longer features and doing some analysis. Gentlemen, I think we'll do first half of this. We can just talk generally about how the media's changed and what's going on right now, some interesting stuff. And then second half, I think we should just unpack it and unload and let people feed back to us what they would like the media to do in terms of coverage, or how do they reach the media, how do they pitch to journalists, perhaps. That might be useful as a thing. But Ben, let me throw it over to you. Wall Street Journal, very well known internationally, a huge, long history. When they said to you, Ben, we want you to cover technology startups, what did you say to them? Did you say, let's launch a blog, or did you say, let's bring the full force of the WSJ to the subject and off you go? Did you come at it from a traditional media point of view, or did you feel like you needed to do something new?
I think if you talk about traditional media, I'm not convinced that that's a term that means anything any longer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, how much more traditional can you get than the Wall Street Journal? It's been established. I mean, we could go to the Times of London. That was established in 1700 and something. But when you look at what is it that we produce everything from, 140-word character tweet through as you said, a blog post, through a longer form journalism, through video, through interactive graphics, through all of these things. So the idea that media, the idea that there is this sort of new media and old media is a term that I think is increasingly, frankly, meaningless.
Yeah.
It's just now a question of which is the most appropriate tool that you have to use. You know, I've been doing journalism long enough that you know, when I started in journalism, you know, you paid for music and water was free. But you know, and in those days, that was all you needed. You needed a notebook and you needed a pen. Now I carry around, you know, basically a recording studio. And the simple question is, which tool is appropriate? Is it appropriate to shoot a video? Is it appropriate? Do I need to write a piece at all? Can I do this in 140 in 140 characters? So the answer to that question is D, all of the above. It's now, we're in a golden period for journalism. We're in a golden period for journalists. You know, when we now all get to do all of these things. The only problem that we have, in the good old days of journalism, you know, your editor gave you your story at 10 o'clock in the morning. You went to the pub for 2 hours. You made a few phone calls in the afternoon, and you filed your copy at 4.
I thought you were supposed to file a copy before you went to the pub.
No, that was never a good idea.
I'm kidding around. But
it doesn't end.
You say it's a golden age of journalism, but yet, I mean, the printing press is free now. Anyone can launch a blog. Anyone can create, you know, a Facebook page, profile, whatever. So there's a whole bunch of business models going on. But I take your point that if we were having, for instance, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, then everyone would still be all at sea about what business models and, you know, is it old journalism, old media or new media? Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's dealing with the fact that media is just generally heading towards racing at a pace towards digital.
Yeah, but I think the one thing I would say is that what has not, I say it's a golden age for journalism, it's not necessarily a golden age, it's by no means a golden age for newspapers.
Yeah.
But what has not changed and what must not change are the fundamental tools of journalism, what it is to be a journalist. And journalists are, you know, the skills that are required in that are required of a journalist have not changed and must not change.
Well, that's interesting you should say, because actually, I mean, you have here Robin Wauters. You were never a traditional journalist. You got hired by Tech. Well, you were at the Next Web, then you were at TechCrunch, and then you were at Next
It's
Web
kind of
again.
funny to hear Ben talk about the old days, the good old days of journalism when I was never actually in journalism. I was never trained as a journalist.
Yeah.
I never worked at any of the big newspapers or publishing companies. So all of this is kind of new to me as well.
Yeah.
It's fun.
And and yet you're publishing a title. Presumably, if somebody wanted to sue you for saying something incorrect, they could do in Belgium, under Belgian law. I mean, because that's where you're based out of. Or where is Tech.eu based?
Tech.eu is actually based in London. So we're headquartered in
it's the legal jurisdiction in which it's based. So you're going to be subject to British libel law. Welcome to the party.
I heard. Yeah.
That's going to be fun.
Fun times.
Yeah. How many lawyers do you have?
So far, haven't needed any. We're only like a week in, so.
I had to run a story through 3 lawyers once. The other day. That was mad. But yeah, I mean, the printing tools are out there. You've launched a blog. I mean, what's the barrier to entry? Because a lot of times people say to me, how do you actually produce content? How do you get news out there? You know, how does it all work? And I say, well, you know, you set yourself up, you start writing, you write every day, pretty soon you get a reputation and people start coming to you with stories, I guess. I mean, do you think that it's as simple as that? Or, because there's a lot of noise out there. I mean, launching a new title is pretty tough.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the barrier to entry is very, very low.
Yeah.
Anyone can start a WordPress blog. You have a decent camera on your phone, so you can do video content pretty easily. The hard part is doing it consistently, quality on a longer term, and frequently, which is very hard. You can start blogging, but are you going to keep on blogging?
And making it pay.
And yeah, making it pay is even something to consider even after all that. But just having the stamina to go at it every day, and to build a network and to build relationships that can help you become a better reporter over time. Something that takes a lot of time and skill and effort that a lot of people don't take into account when they get into the business. But
Oleksandr, if I could turn to you, Perhaps you could unpack for us and tell us a little bit about what your media company's been doing about the transition to digital and how it's making it pay, as it were, and what kind of tools your journalists are using now.
As a journalist who started career, I'm a journalist by profession. I started career, as far as I remember, with type machine.
Sorry, could you speak up?
With type machine.
With a typewriter?
With a typewriter.
Right.
That's worse than me.
Yeah. It was me too. Yesterday or on Tuesday, our internet site, which is part of our group, TechUA, which has the same name as our flagship news program on offline.
I think you might, if you speak up a bit, that'd be good.
Or maybe put the mic a little closer to you.
Put the mic close to you.
Like
Yeah, that's
this?
good.
Much better.
That's
Great.
better.
2 days ago, due to the events which we have in our country, our internet site, TechUA, which has the same name as our flagship news program, TSN, break a record of users. It was 900 users, almost 900 users per day. The reason is not only because we established it several years ago and developed quite well, but because of multi-screen habit of usage. Because this particular site got these numbers not only because we are great in terms of journalism, but because we are using video. The same video, content which was produced by our offline journalist. They not only produced particular stories for this site, but also the site used their rough material to be online all the time. So when we're speaking about what is coming first in terms of interest for internet audience, from our view as traditional media, it's changing habits, because people are not changing habit not to view television. In Ukraine, the average viewer watch television 4 hours, 30 minutes per day, which is quite a big number. But at the same time, they're increasing using other screen, like internet sites, like
so do you see that the audience for the content that you guys are producing, is it spread across screens now, from television to tablet to mobile phone?
And yeah, and we see no, in fact, competition between them. It's like additional second screen of usage for us.
Are you managing to monetize that content well?
Yes. We will be launching quite soon our own video platform with a content which will combine all sources which have our media group. And I think it will be a new event for this market, and we believe in its monetization too.
Mark, if I can turn to you, the consumption of content now has radically changed. I mean, when Flipboard came out, it was quite a radical new idea, and others came along, like ZITE, for instance, and we've seen a sort of a whole new wave of consumption in different kinds of ways. Where is it going now? You're wearing a Google Glass. Do you feel that the next stage is going to be wearable media, where people are consuming media on the go via these wearable devices?
Yeah, I mean, I think wearables are going to be really important. I'm not sure what media will look like on them. The way I see it is that Gutenberg invented the printing press in the late 1400s, and periodicals came out at some point after that. And basically, journalists have been writing stories of a couple hundred to a couple thousand words since then. That is, the magazines, regular periodicals when they came out in the 1800s basically look like periodicals do today, look like blogs do today, look like newspapers do today. And the thing that I worry about the most isn't really new waves of distribution. So a blog is essentially a newspaper that's sort of chronological. Oh, that's interesting, I guess. What I wonder about is, when are we going to actually change what we deliver as news? That is, when are we going to... Twitter is interesting. Facebook is interesting. And what worries me about that in terms of traditional media is that kind of technology isn't owned by the media companies anymore, right? That technology is being innovated somewhere else. So if you look at something like a ZITE or a Flipboard, it's just it's just a consumption method, not really changing the underlying atomic unit of news. And to me, I think that that's where innovation needs to happen and happen really darn soon.
But the innovation, to some extent, was ZITE and Flipboard basically coming between the media and the readers and saying, you know, we've got this whole new interface which readers actually really like, and therefore you were getting the eyeballs as a result, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think the reason that ZITE and Flipboard, so there's two things there. So ZITE solves one problem, which is how do people find news that they actually care about? So ZITE looks at millions of articles a day. We try to figure out what you like to read, and then we deliver you stuff from all over the web. So it could be fresh voices you've never heard, or the Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch. So that's a big problem for users, right? Like, in the old world, we're sort of in a publication-based world. That is, editors sort of choose what you read, and you read a few publications based on sort of the things that you like. But actually, I want to tell it that I like technology, I like astronomy, and no matter where it comes from, I want to see really interesting, high-quality content. On the other side, sort of what I think was Flipboard's great innovation was displaying the content in a much better way. I mean, the reality was when Flipboard came out, most traditional media companies had really, really shitty mobile experiences. And Flipboard's innovation was actually just making that a really beautiful, wonderful magazine-like reading experience. And unfortunately, that innovation didn't come from big media companies. It had to come from the outside.
So, so guys, I mean, anyone on the panel, I mean, the media's kind of making a mistake here, basically trying to reproduce this chronological model that, you know, the old ways of the editors getting in the way of the content. Surely the answer is for media companies to launch their own technology platforms or do apps. I mean, why did you do a blog, and why didn't you just produce an iPad app or something instead of a blog?
Well, it's a fair point. So first of all, we're a small team, so you have to dedicate your resources somehow. The good thing about being a small new publication is you don't even have to think about where are users going to be reading our content. It's easy. It's going to be mobile, and it's going to be some desktop. Do we need to build an app with the technology that's now available for mobile web application? I don't think so. It might be the case for separate, like mini events or specific coverage or like a monthly magazine. That's different. But like daily content, chronological, I think the tools that are out there are already quite sufficient.
It's not something you can do like in-app payments, so you're not tempted by that?
Well, we're a week in, so we're not thinking about that yet.
Watch this space.
The problem with an app is the problem with what does the app do. Right, there are two fundamental problems with apps. The first is that if you are an app, you are competing, your competition is every other app that is on that person's device. So that means you're competing against Facebook, you're competing against Twitter, you're competing against Angry Birds, you're competing against, you know, whatever it is that that person does. And the second thing is that the problem with apps to date is the accessibility of the content. It's a balkanization. You know, that content, if I want to share that content, and we all know social media is a major driver of content, if I deliver it through an app, how do I tell anybody that here is this fantastic content sitting on this, you know, sitting on my app? Well, I have no way of doing that. So I think for media companies, I think distribution is a very key point. You know, we come from the past of, you know, if you think about what a newspaper was, a newspaper essentially, a newspaper was driven, the distribution of the newspaper drove pretty much everything that there was to do with that newspaper. And that distribution comprised a lot of 14-year-old school kids on bicycles. You had to get the newspaper to those 14-year-olds so they could distribute it. So that your distribution chain was built right the way back from that. Literally, the layout of the newsroom was determined by 14-year-old kids on bicycles.
And the fact that the 14-year-old kid had to carry a bunch of this stuff.
They had to carry it. You had to get it to them by a certain time. That meant that the decisions you were making about what constituted news, that was determined by that. The whole concept of an edition.
Yeah.
But I want to challenge this idea of that this concept that editorial control is not a thing that users want. If you take a product like The Economist is a fantastically produced magazine. And the other great thing that The Economist is built on is this sense of completeness. It's this sense that if I read the entire of The Economist magazine, you know, by the end of the week, I will know everything that a reasonable person could be expected to know happened during that week, and I will have an opinion on it.
And have an opinion on it, yeah.
And I have completed the task.
Yeah.
The problem with the way that we distribute news at the moment is it's an infinite well. It doesn't matter how much of it I consume, there's far more that I haven't consumed. And people like that. People like the idea of a sense of completeness. And I think that we stray away from that at our peril.
But I agree with you, and that's going to suit quite a lot of people a lot of the time. One of the problems, though, is that some of the most exciting startups in content and media right now, if you take, for instance, a startup like Upworthy, which is generating like 40 million page impressions within months of its launch virtually, on a staff of, I don't know what it is, it's about 30 people. I mean, it's ridiculously small. Incredibly small staff, enormous amounts of traffic. And they're not doing anything in news. They're in content, and they're in kind of inspirational content, especially in video, almost entirely video, basically. So there's clearly something going on there that means that there's whole swathes of content out there, not just news, but content aimed at particular audiences, which, you know, there are yet to be tapped, that haven't been tapped.
Well, I mean, look at mobile devices. I mean, who would have thought that the second most used task on a tablet was going to be news reading, right? It's email and then news is consistently how it's ranked, and they're very, very close to each other. I don't think it's the case that I think the sense of completion is a view of the world before electronics. You
think what, sorry?
I think it's a view of the world before electronic delivery.
No, I disagree.
There's something perhaps nice about it, but I usually want more, and I actually want to be in control of whether I get more or not. Like, I think that there's a nice ability with the web to say, hey, you know what? Turns out I actually really want to. I read this Bitcoin story, and I'm not done yet. The Economist story was really good, and now I want to see other opinions on it. And I think that new interfaces really allow us to dive deeper and consume a lot more. And I think when I've got the time, I think it's a wonderful luxury to have to go do that kind of research. Yeah.
But I mean, time is something that's not necessarily people have a lot of these days, is it? Do we agree that? I mean, one of the problems with the news industry and the content industry is it is competing, as you said, Ben, with Angry Birds, with so many other aspects. I mean, take the Daily Mail. Now, the Daily Mail in the UK, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but the dailymail.co.uk, ostensibly the biggest newspaper in the world, enormous stories about celebrities, filled with Miley Cyrus every day virtually, and et cetera. So that's, I mean, effectively that's taken over the agenda now, hasn't it? I mean, if I was going to launch a news startup today, it would probably be in the era of entertainment, because hard news or investigative journalism or something like that doesn't necessarily get anywhere, does it?
Well, doesn't it rather depend who your audience is? I mean, if you want to appeal to, people who, for whom celebrity news is a very important driver, then yes, you're going to find it quite difficult to challenge the supremacy of the Daily Mail. You know, there are people for whom the state of the cellulite on Rihanna's thighs is a very key piece of information, and the Daily Mail will give you a pretty much daily update on that. Equally well, if your audience is people who have to make investment decisions based on analysis of global situations, then I dare say newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal, such as the Financial Times, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, you know, The Economist, we're not big on Rihanna's thighs. don't tend to cover it too much. I mean, I'm sure we might be able to come up with an angle on it.
Whether
So
or not
it's all about
stocks going up or down.
It's all about identifying your audience and delivering to that audience exactly the product that they need, and that audience varies.
I think this is where editorial control goes awry, though, right? Is that I think if you look at a BuzzFeed or a Huffington Post, that's why they're a bit more successful. And if you look at something like ZITE, which is highly personalized to you, it's even more successful in terms of page views. And the reason is that people want to know about Miley Cyrus, and they want a really great analysis on their stocks, right? If you look at BuzzFeed, it astonishes me some of what I would consider crap that's produced that I get totally sucked into. And then I read a really great article by a journalist I respect there that did a lot of investigative research into that article, and it's impressive. Huffington Post won a Pulitzer Prize, right? I mean, I think that we have to face the reality that people want their crap news and they want their serious news, and sometimes they want them together.
I guess a good example of that is Business Insider, I think.
Absolutely.
Which is, a lot of crap filled with occasional flashes of brilliance. Alexander, let me give you a point. Let me ask you something.
I was writing articles for two economists quite a long time ago. If we're speaking about the ways of distribution of content and audience which like Economist 10 years ago and will like Economist if it continue to do the same way of producing articles in 10 years' time, I don't believe they will get any audience at all. Because the tradition of gathering the news, of producing the news, changed during my own experience of being in this business completely, and especially the habits of new generation of getting this information and analyzing, producing it by themselves. All of them became authors. They have their ability to produce this news, to analyze, to contribute. And the way how traditional media, especially printing media, are continues the habit of producing the news like Economist, I think it's 5-10 years from that time that will end.
Alexander, let me ask you, do you see a greater appetite for technology news amongst your audiences?
Yes, of course.
And that's gone up in the last, year or 2 years, 3 years?
I think we're not so much, of course, developed as Western Europe or America in these terms, but even the figures which we do have, the data which we do have about the habits of viewers and users, readers, changed completely in the last 2 or 3 years, and it is developing. We see the number of people who are using an internet not only in big cities, but especially in small cities in Ukraine, are growing dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years. As far as I remember...
I think Mike is applying for a job.
Sorry? I'm applying for a job,
applying for a job.
Yeah.
Have you got any openings? I want you guys to start thinking about questions you want to ask about either the media business or news or technology news or whatever you want to ask, basically. So start thinking about questions, and I just want to throw it out there for you guys to respond. Technology now is very much part of the mainstream. We're all walking around with smartphones now. Some of us are wearing Google Glass, etc., etc. Technology is becoming hugely mainstream now. And the ordinary person, it's not just a matter of having to program the video now or buy a TV. It's a very big deal now. It's affecting our lives. It's affecting the lives of our families, of the older generation as well. Is there too much tech news? Where's the actual meat here? I mean, if you look at something like techmeme.com every day, there seems to be so much news to wade through.
I don't think
is there
is.
enough tech news? Too much? What's going on?
No, you can't have enough tech news. What you can have enough is the same kind of tech news. If you look at, we were talking about entertainment, like celebrity, which is a very competitive space because the barrier to entry is so low. You don't really have to understand anything about celebrities to write about them. You have to kind of understand technology to write about technology. If you only focus on the big ones like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft, your job is a lot easier than if you focus on innovation, try to write smart analysis about startups, try and predict where the future is going to happen rather than just reporting on the news as it's happening. So there's different kinds of tech news, but there isn't enough tech news per se. I think there is room for a lot more.
You will typically see, 25 stories about Yahoo's announcement that they've bought a company.
Of course, and it's perfectly
more
natural.
or less repeated over and over. Very, very little new information often. Although, admittedly, it's quite tough to actually get new information. A lot of reporters are trying to get new angles on those stories. I mean, technology news must be one of the biggest drivers towards your service, yes?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the top categories, I believe it for a long time was Apple, iPad, and technology.
Yeah.
But the long tail is really interesting too. I mean, frankly, I think that technology is becoming more important, and we really, I believe in a better, more free, more democratic society in the future, and we're going to need to make a lot of really complicated decisions about technology in the very near future. I mean, think of just 10 years ago. You couldn't imagine things like self-driving cars, everybody having a phone in their pocket that has constant access to all the world's information. You couldn't imagine that everybody was connected not just by their personal relationships, but by the social web thing that we've got now. There's all these technologies that have sort of sat around for a long time, sort of in theory, now that are going to be here in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think a better informed population in terms of technology is something we need. And I couldn't agree more that honestly, I think a lot of tech reporters are very lazy. And I think it's driven by kind of the page view mentality, but sort of the parroting of what's in a press release or what was in the email from the PR people is often what I see. And I can tell you this, that, ZITE does a really good job of getting press. The day we launched, we had 52 pieces of original news, and I can count on one hand, there were actually 5 pieces that were really good, well-researched, and had something to contribute to the conversation. Everything else was, frankly, just crap. Well, or not crap, it was just parroting kind of what everybody knew.
Yeah, I think the mistake that's being made in this whole conversation is this idea that there is this single defining thing called news, and that there is a single defining thing called an audience. And what is perfectly clear is that there are different audiences have different needs. So, the fact that Yahoo buys, Yahoo spends £30 million or $30 million on buying some company you've never heard of, for a very large amount of the audience, for a very large number of a general audience, they don't give a stuff. But there are people for whom that is absolutely a key piece of information. There are people for whom and the fact that that has happened is all they need. They don't need people to go into great strokey beard depth analysis of, the significance of Marissa Mayer's 14th acquisition. They just simply need to know, company X was bought for this amount of money. Why? Because they make investment decisions on the back of it for any number of reasons. And the other thing I think that's important to say is when you look at the history of media, no one media has ever fully replaced another. There is still a market for cutting letters in stone. It's just not as big a market as it used to be. So the idea that there is a one-size technological solution...
That's what you call slow news.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it has a permanence that most of us would envy. The idea that there is a single platform, that there is a single audience, that there is a single concept of what is news, I think is very misleading. And, that you have to be careful you have to be very, very careful to know and understand the particular requirements of your audience and tailor what news is for them.
Okay. Right, well, what we'd like to do is unpack this. If you have any questions for the panel talking about the news business or the digital content business or how the hell you get on Tech.eu, that's a good question.
Or TechCrunch.
Or Tech Meme, that's another good question. That's a mystery to me. I don't know if we've got any microphones. Have we got any microphones in the audience? Because if we don't, if you don't have any microphones, I'll tell you what, I can do that thing.
Or scream really loud and we can repeat it.
Hello, is this working?
Oh, awesome.
Okay, who are you?
Hi, my name is Andre. I'm from the Newswire company. We do digital magazines. So that's my question. What do you think about the magazine's future and digital sphere?
What's the future of magazines?
Yeah. So the question was, what's the future of digital magazines? Yeah. The question is, what is a magazine? How do you define a magazine? Because I feel we are producing a magazine. It's just that it's online. It's long form. Do you mean print magazine? I'll let
look at the record industry, and I think you'll have your answer. There's a niche market. There's always going to be things that people want in print. Actually, I bought a book last night that I saw on my ZITE that I thought was really interesting. But there are very few books I actually buy in print. I prefer most of my books now on my Kindle. And I have a friend. I go over once a week for dinner, and they have a collection of 3,000 records, and they think that vinyl is really cool. 99% of people get all of their music digitally. Magazines are dead.
Dead?
I think digital magazines will never take hold. I think that the people that subscribe to digital magazines are the people that remember kind of what magazines were. I mean, do you think people 18 to 25 are going to be buying magazines in 10 years, digitally or otherwise? No.
Who here subscribes to a digital version of a magazine, like Wired magazine or something? You're kind of in the minority, not very many. Who here reads... okay, let's do a little survey. Who here reads the news on Flipboard or ZITE or something like that? Put your hand up. Right. Put your hand down. Right. Who here still reads RSS? Oh, some of you geeks out there. Who reads the news on, just looks at their Facebook page or their Twitter feed? Lots of you. Mm-hmm. Social.
Yep.
Very big, isn't it?
I mean, this is your answer, man. It's like... You might want to look at a different business.
Okay, we've got some more questions. Who else has got a question? Right, let's do this. Come over here.
He has a mic.
Okay, can you run around with the microphone? Awesome, let's do that. I don't have to move.
Oh, right. What do you think about news globalization? It's very few people 10 years ago read Economist in Ukraine. But it's very common to read TechCrunch now here. And what is the influence of the thing? How your audience, is it bigger than before? Because it's no borders between countries using the internet. And is it a challenge or is it an opportunity?
So I didn't quite get what you first said. News what? Disintermediation? What?
Internationalization.
Oh, internationalization.
Globalization.
Localization. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, so we should launch TechCrunch Ukraine. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you want? Yeah? Oh, I see. We're like in the local versions, local language, etc. What do you guys think?
Okay.
Should we do that?
I'm going to say something on this. That the French have a lovely expression for a phrase which they call the kilomètre mort, the death kilometer. And what that tells you is how many people you have to kill in order to get into a newspaper. If there is a train crash tomorrow in Kyiv and no one is injured on it, that will be in the newspapers. That will be in your news bulletins. You will write about train crashes in Kyiv. There could be a train crash in Saigon, in which 20 people are injured and 3 of them are killed. Okay? No newspaper, no news bulletin, no traditional media is going to write about that story. Why? Because people don't care. People care in Saigon, but they don't care in Ukraine. You have other things to worry about here. You don't care about train crashes in Vietnam or train crashes in London, to be frank. So what do people care about? They care about the things that matter to them. And typically, why are celebrities so important? Why is the Daily Mail the most successful news website in the world? Because it writes about celebrities. People care about celebrities because they think they know them. They have an emotional connection with those celebrities. When that guy, what was his name? The guy who was in Fast and Furious, who's
Paul Walker.
Paul Walker, right, so Paul Walker, okay, smashes up his car and he dies. There were people who were very, very genuinely, and I'm not being disrespectful to them, were incredibly upset about his death. And they had never met this guy in their entire life, but they cared. So the question about globalization, to answer your question, is it all depends. The reality is we care most about the things that are close to us, and close to us could mean either close in the sense of distance. We care about, if you're here in Kyiv, you care about what happens in Kyiv, you care about what's happening up in the square, but you don't care about what's happening in Warsaw, or close to us from an emotional sense.
I can give you an answer to this, which is much more specific, which is and to do with technology startups and technology news, which is that most people, because now so much of the world's technology is run on the big platforms, sorry, it's popping away, big platforms like Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon. These are the big future big companies now. We haven't got, Yahoo's not quite back in the game yet. Microsoft is, God knows what they're doing, but they're not quite there yet. So it's Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon. And you can basically, if you write about those companies, pretty much everybody in this room will be interested in those companies. They're the Rihannas. That's the Rihanna cellulites. That's the story that everybody's interested in, right? That's a celebrity story. Now, the flip side of that is a startup, and in fact, I got a press release just before I came on stage today, is a startup in London that has hired somebody. Now, somebody's being hired by a startup is not, unless they are really, really amazing, like Jeff Bezos has decided to leave Amazon and join this startup. Unless it's that news, then this is not an interesting news story. And this guy DM'd me on Twitter, said, Mike, I've got a breaking news story for you. And I said, what is it? And he says, we've hired somebody. And I was like, okay, but this is not news for me, and this is the thing, I go, and you guys probably get this as well, if you go around Europe and I go to somewhere like Slovenia and they say, when are you going to launch TechCrunch Slovenia? And I'm going well, the thing is, there's not really much of a business model for starters to do that localization, and B, the only people interested in a startup in Slovenia that's hiring somebody are those guys in Slovenia or in Ljubljana. Now, if a big company comes out of Slovenia or out of Ukraine or whatever, and there are big companies coming out of Europe now, then that's when it becomes interesting, right? So that's the difference. It's pretty simple, but sometimes you just need to spell it out. Who's got some more questions?
No more question actually, guys. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. So actually, you guys have to move to the workshop. Okay. So that's where the question would be addressed. So these guys will be in a few minutes on the 3rd floor to continue to actually ask you answer your questions.
Yeah, come and join us.
Exactly. So they'll be there. So that was the last panel. You can upload them, please, first. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the panel.
So
see you later.